Toda rabba, Rav Beder, for everything you have done this year and in previous years, for these precious and important days, the days of Emunah. Without too many introduction, we'll go straight in. This past Shabbat, we read about the peak of Yetziat Mitzrayim, Kriyat Yam Suf. This coming Shabbat, we're moving on to Matan Torah, the combination of these two most important events in the history of the Jewish people. Torah will claim in the history of mankind, the combination of these two events that happened a few weeks one from another, Yetziat Mitzrayim and Matan Torah, is what formed us into a people. Now here in Sefer Shemot, which we were reading these weeks, they seem to be presented as the event of freeing us from slavery, from exile to freedom, and then as free people who have been freed from slavery, we go to receive the Torah. Is that correct? Of course that's correct. But 40 years later, when we revisit these events at the Sefer Dvarim, for those who I have a zchut of learning Sefer Dvarim with, think about it. 40 years later, Bnei Israel reach a level where we hear there something a little different. And that is source number one. Look inside. I came with a source sheet because everybody's here, Shana Aleph, Shana Bet. I'm not going to read all sources inside. It makes it a little difficult and can be sometimes tiring. I'm aware of that. But if anybody can recommend it to look at the source sheets as I mention them. Some I'll just point out where they appear. Some I may read a few lines inside. In any case, especially for Shana Bet or Gimel people are in the room, it's in order to provide you with sources. I'm trying to address multiple levels, Shana Aleph, Shana Bet, Shana Gimel simultaneously. It's not always the easiest of challenges. Look inside source number one. Source number one, this might be a source which Rav Beder mentioned in his speech, I'm not sure. 2, 3 psukim earlier, I just didn't have time to place the photocopy it, that says, go out to every side of the world, from one end of the world to the other, and check whether there was ever these type of events, which is what I'm reading inside. Source number one, Parashat Beit Hanan, Sefer Dvarim. Hashama am kol Elohim medaber mitoch haesh kasher shamata ta vayechi. Check worldwide. Was there ever a nation, not an individual? I've been to psychiatric wards. A lot. Thank God not for myself. I've met many people who claim that God spoke to them. What's the difference between that and Christianity or Islam? Have you ever, the psukim say, heard of a people who as an entire people heard God speak to them out of the fire? Oh, pasuk lamedalet, look inside. או הניסה אלוהים לבוא לקחת לו גוי מקרב גוי. במסות, באותות ובמופתים ובמלחמה וביד חזקה ובזרוע נטויה ובמוראים גדולים ככל אשר עשה לכם השם אלוקיכם במצרים לעיניך? Or have you ever seen in history an event where one nation was taken out from the midst of another one, as you have seen? And what are these events for? What were they meant to develop? We'll hear the next pasuk and we'll hear that in Sefer Dvarim, Yetziat Mitzrayim and Matan Torah are presented a little differently, as having the combination between them are meant to bring a complete revolution in consciousness in a way that we don't hear yet in Sefer Shemot. Look inside. What the conclusion of them is, and the pasuk that we know, Ata horet al hadat, you were shown as a result of what we just said. The events of Matan Torah combined with Yetziat Mitzrayim were there to show you, so that you know, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, ein od milvado. Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei is the God, and there's nothing but Him. Now I want to emphasize, some of you are already familiar with this, whether it's the Maharal, one of the most terrific minds in Judaism ever, one of the most important sources in Jewish thought of all times, one of the biggest influences on the development of Jewish thought. We don't have time to talk about him enough. His descendant, Ha'admor HaZaken, Baal HaTanya, who founded Chabad and wrote Sefer HaTanya, okay, by both of them and others, you will hear that this pasuk is not coming to exclude other gods. This pasuk is, just like the few psukim down, which we don't have in front of us, the pasuk which we say 3 times a day, V'yadata hayom v'ashevot levavecha, ki Hashem, hu Elokim, b'shamayim mimal v'al haaretz mitachat ein od, whether it's ata horet al adat, ki Hashem hu Elokim, ein od milvado, or v'yadata hayom, etc., it's not coming here to exclude other gods. That other places in the Torah does. These psukim are busy excluding any other reality. Not easy to take in. Ask Zachariah Palak, is he here? We've been breaking our head on these concepts for 1.5 years already. Week after week. Ata horet al adat ki Hashem hu Elokim ein od milvado. There's no other reality but Him. Now, so what comes out of it is as such. What the pasuk is saying is that nothing exists. Nothing really exists but Him. Now, when we check the way we're used to looking at reality from the time that we're children, is the complete opposite. Everything exists but Him, with a capital H. Why? Because we get used to from childhood, we come into life and we get used to develop and to acquire, again, for lack of any other term, a secular view of the world, where all that I see is that exists. Whenever I don't see, it doesn't exist. And God, you don't see. So then He probably doesn't exist. And if He exists, He somewhat exists. So what comes out? What this pasuk here is saying, Ata horet al adat ki Hashem hu Elokim ein od milvado, is claiming, Judaism claims, Torah Yisrael claims, listen to this, it's dramatic, that the way we view reality on a regular daily level, that whatever we see exists, whatever we don't see doesn't exist, which of course is then developed extensively by scientific thinking, that originates back in the Greek philosophy and Greek science, and influences and infuses the world of atheism. Ad etzem hayom hazeh, whatever I don't see doesn't exist. Therefore, Torah will claim that the way all of us view reality is the biggest optical illusion. Because, again, Torah claims nothing exists but Him. We claim, so to speak, everything exists but Him. These are two completely opposite perspectives. And because it's the biggest and thickest optical illusion, that is why Torah says, you know what the solution for that is? To close your eyes and to cover your eyes with your hand and to declare the truth of this world. Also in Sefer Dvarim, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's the only way to escape the optical illusion. Isn't it fascinating? We're not just told to close our eyes. To close our eyes and to cover our eyes. And only then, and to that extent, am I able to tap into what Torah claims is the true reality. Ata horet al adat, ki Hashem hu Elokim, ein od milvado. Now this sentence is the Jewish sentence of all times. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. You hear reports and testimonies of people in Kibbutz Be'eri or Nachal Oz and all the kibbutzim, Nebuch, who went through the massacre, last Simchat Torah, and many of them, not at all religious, testified that as they were holding the handle of the door to the mamad, to the security room, putting their entire being into that to save their lives and their children and wives' lives, some of them came out alive, some did not. Hashem yinkom damam. Amen. People who had nothing to do with their Judaism, they kept saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Testimonies from the Nova Party. We visited there a couple months ago. Of people who were hiding on the trees, on branches. And as they heard people being shot to death, women being raped, and then shot to death, and then silence after an hour of screaming, they kept whispering to themselves, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. You hear that from testimonies in Auschwitz and all throughout the ages. It's this sentence. Somehow, I want to elaborate on this, and it's intense. When Malach HaMavet is present, somehow, a person feels, as disconnected as he may be from his Jewish roots, he feels an internal need to declare, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Why? I thought about it in the last few days. One aspect is, in front of Malach HaMavet, I come to the realization, if there's one who can save me right now, it's only he, who I didn't know till now, or I wasn't sure that he exists. I have a sense that he does. And I turn to him to save me. And if I won't be saved, and this I don't know if they're able to process or to understand, but I think they're non-conscious. Their soul tells them that if they're not going to come out alive, they're going to be finding themselves in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it says in the Zohar. The moment we leave our body, we see the Shekhinah, which we're not able to, as long as our soul is inside the blinder, the great blinder, which is the body. The body does not allow us to see the presence of God, which is completely, totally, completely present. But our body blinds that. The more we work on ourselves throughout a lifetime, as a Torah Jew committed to Torah and mitzvot, on levels that Bezrat Hashem will talk about tonight, so gradually, I learned to treat my bodily level in a proper and more proper way, in a way that's more transcended, in a way that it less and less blinds me. And I'm able to live God's presence in this world before I die. But when we leave our body, says the Zohar, ala pasuk, ki lo yirani adam v'chai, when you're alive, you're not able to see the presence of God. But when you leave the body, that moment you do. And somehow the soul of a person knows that and causes him, at least I leave this world with Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Now, Jewish law, starting in the Mishnah, starting in Psukim, and Sefer Dvarim, Parashat Shema ve'Yayim Shamoah, continuing to the Mishnah in Masechet Brachot, and the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, וכך נפסק להלכה ברמב"ם, ובשולחן ערוך, and that is part of Taryag Mitzvot, to be makabel upon ourselves, Ol Malchut Shamayim, twice a day, b'shochbecha u'vekumecha, with Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which means don't wait for the visit of Malach HaMavet. Do this daily. Try to peel off the delusion, the optical illusions that we suffer from day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out. That's what Shema is about. And when we devote ourselves to that, then over weeks and months of going over and over and over, what we start experiencing is the removal, layer after layer, like an onion, of peels, not of onions, but the onion of delusion is being peeled off. More, more, more. I can tell you, on a more personal note, I might have been 20, 21, when I first really took into heart the concept of delusion, that people can live in a lie. I can tell you all the way till today, and we're talking about around 40 years, nothing scares me more in life than the idea that later on in life, I'll look back and I'll realize retroactively that I was living in a delusion or in a lie. Nothing scares me more. And I highly recommend that also for you, nothing should scare you more. And the only way to deal with it and address it is if I devote my life to peel off delusions, which requires, number one, having the guts and developing the maturity and becoming a man on what level? I'm willing to face the fact that I have been living in mistakes, that my perspective of reality is off, even though it's more convenient to continue looking at the world the way I'm used to. But the price I'll pay over the course of my lifetime for living in mistakes, more than anything else, misinterpretations of reality, mental mistakes, it's worth putting in the effort. And the younger we do it, the better. And you're young. Kedai, to start young. And that's why I highly recommend to take advantage of these days. And even though sometimes it's a little much, you have to hear Rav Thaler, and you have to hear Rav Bader, and now you have to hear me, and more. I know it's not so easy. I don't know if I would be able to put up with that. I recommend that you push yourself and you try to take out of these days as much as possible, even if sometimes it's a little much. It takes a lot of maturity to address HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's going to be our topic in the next few minutes. Okay, look inside in source number 2. The beginning of Sefer Shir HaShirim, Edot HaMizrach in the room, Sephardi people in the room are more familiar with it. They say it every Shabbat, correct? Ashkenazim, less so. Some of us only hear it once a year. Unfortunately, the song of songs. All songs are Kodesh in Torah. Chazal teaches, Rabbi Akiva says, Shir HaShirim, Kodesh Kodashim. We'll touch upon one aspect of what it may mean in a moment. But Shir HaShirim starts off with, I underlined that. The third pasuk, look inside. Mashcheni acharecha. Pull, we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Pull me after you. Narutza will run in. Heviani hamelech hadarav. The king, which is referring, of course, to God, is going to bring me, or wants to bring me, into his more inner rooms. Maze omer. That means God has different rooms, chambers in his world. More external rooms and more internal rooms. Such as here, our Bet Midrash. What do we do in this room over here? It's a room where we learn Torah, mitzvot. We analyze Dinei HaTorah, Chukei HaTorah, Hilchot HaTorah, Mishpatei HaTorah of God. But most of the time here, we don't address directly God himself. There's another chamber in this room. That's the other chamber. I'm not talking about the cave. I'm talking about the Aron HaKodesh. And that's already a level and a place where it's not just God's laws and God's dinim and God's mitzvot, but God himself. And this is a mikdash me'at, as every shul or bet midrash is. And so it is in Bet HaMikdash. Bet HaMikdash is made up of, as we know, from Masechet Midot, Masechet Kelim. There are more external chambers as there are more internal chambers. And the innermost chamber is where the king is. And Kodesh HaKodashim. 3 times a day, we're expected to go into that internal chamber when we daven. Many people find that very difficult. I know that. I get many of my conversations on that topic. It's very hard for me, Rav Amos, to daven. It's easy for me to learn. It's hard in its own ways. But to learn, somehow I can do. But to daven, it's very challenging for me on many different levels. I think what it means is I can learn his Torah. I can even try to keep his mitzvot. But to address him directly, that's a little much. I'll say even more so. What I'm about to say is a bit harsh. I think many of us, I'm saying us, I mean the Jewish people, in our generation at least, maybe in other generations also, I'm less familiar with them, use, it's going to be harsh, okay, you ready? Use Jewish robotism, the Jewish conduct, as a cover-up, so I don't have to deal with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. I can put a check. I went to Shachas. I was Yotzei Chiyuv of Minyan. I'm Yotzei this. I was Yotzei all these things. I don't have to worry about having to deal with him. You know? Let me just keep Torah and mitzvot. I don't have to deal with you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's too much. It takes a lot of honesty. A person has to be extremely, infinitely authentic with himself. Genuine, real, sincere. Midat HaEmet. That Baruch Hashem, thanks to Rabbeinu, we get this a lot in this building. Not to play games. I think it's one of the things that most influenced me about over the many years that I have the zchut of working with the Rabbeinu. Why is it so difficult? Why is it that there's an older man here in the old city? I'm sure all of you know what he looks like. His name is Gutman or Gilax. Some of you may have met him. Interesting fellow. I never really had a conversation with him. Sometimes you see him by the tefillin stand of Chabad as you go into the Kotel Plaza. He spent 40 years of his life looking for the truth, amongst which he was also a guru in India for some years. And he said, after 40 years of wandering in the desert, he said he'll give Judaism his own people a chance. He goes into Bet Midrash of the yeshiva, and he's shocked after 2-3 days. He writes it in one of his books. I remember reading it many years ago. He says he was shocked. They talk about everything here, but one thing they don't talk about, God. It's a little funny. Yeshivot have a minhag just not to talk about God. It's not exactly, I'm sorry for the cynicism, it's not exactly so yeshivish. I think there's deeper reasons that one has to explore. Why do we try to avoid having to deal with him? Why is it so difficult? One can say many things. I'm going to try to be short going through them. Number one, nobody ever taught me how to do this. It's not something that people educate. Yeshivot don't teach. Definitely not in yeshiva high school. I'm just like thrown into the water, daven, but I don't see God. Just do it. God is abstract. He's beyond. He's infinite. I can't see him. It's not easy to relate to such a being. That's on the most simple level. But it goes deeper. Having to meet God really one-on-one means facing my life. Facing the fact that once upon a time I was not alive. And someone chose for me to exist. And it's a reminder when I meet God in my mind that my life doesn't belong to me. The Western side in me doesn't like hearing that. Nachon? We like to think that we own ourselves. Torah says you don't own yourself. You didn't make yourself. You don't own yourself. But the Western piece in our head that we're almost wired by is, I'm my own balabait. You're not your own balabait about anything. You're only balabait over the choices you make. But your body, your eyes, your ears, your heart, your brain, nothing in us belongs to us. We don't like hearing it. We may start moving uncomfortably in our chairs. It doesn't belong to us because we didn't make it. It was deposited in our hands. And we have an obligation to take responsibility for that. That's not ours. I think it's the biggest machloket with the Western world, with the Western secular world. Kol sheken with that Western liberal world. My body is not mine. I can't choose what gender to belong to. Trump gives a heter to talk this way, right? It's okay. My eyes are not mine. My reproductive organs are not mine. My reproductive capabilities are not mine. Nothing is mine. We don't like hearing it. I don't like hearing it, but that's the truth. If I were to make anything of me, it would be me. I would be mine. I didn't make any of me, and therefore I don't belong to me. There's a moment in the day that I can really chap that. If I say Kriyat Shema L'Mitah properly, so the moment I open up my eyes in the morning and I say Modeani, I can chap that. I recommend to try. Wow, I'm alive again. I didn't have to be. Someone chose to give me the gift of existence. How many of us stop to think about it? Thank you, God, for letting me be as opposed to not being. That's Modeani. It's mamash on the level of to be or not to be. I didn't have to be. Someone gave me the gift of being. Do I thank God for that? I'm on a much more fundamental level than my capabilities, that I have eyes, that I have a brain. Everything requires hodah. We're talking about the very fact that I am as opposed to not. Okay, so when I meet God really one-on-one, if I'm honest and genuine and authentic, it's like an earthquake. It's unpleasant. It reminds me that my whole existence is like fragile when I'm really in front of Him. It takes me out of my delusion. That's why when we meet Malach HaMavet, we feel delusions are removed. And usually those are life-changing experiences. Now, to be afraid to go in to the king. Let me ask you the following question. Think, well, do we have a biblical source for someone who is afraid to go into the king?
Esther?
Coming up soon, Esther Amalka. You'll tell me, what does that got to do with anything? That's King Achashverosh. That's not what the Gemara in Masechet Megillah says. Balayla hahu nadada shnat hamelech nadada shnat malko shel olam. Of course it was King Achashverosh, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu also dresses up in a costume on Purim. Not only us, we emulate him. And what's the costume? King Achashverosh. That's what the Gemara there says. I take Chazal very seriously. That means Hamelech, all throughout Megillat Esther, is referring to the king, with a capital K. So when Esther is afraid to go into the king, she's afraid to go into Achashverosh, but there's a deeper fear to go in front of the king. And what does Mordechai tell her? Maybe the whole reason you were elected to be here in the first place was for that. I hear in that a sentence of eternity to every one of us. You're afraid to go into the king? Maybe that's what you were put here in the first place for. What is here? Here in Olam Hazeh. Why? Because it says so explicitly in the Zohar. Those of you who were here, Shana Bet, Shana Gimel, Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the yeshiva has a minhag Yisrael Kedoshim, to say Tfilat HaShla HaKadosh. Right? Remember? Tfilat HaShla HaKadosh, that we should be zocheh to have pure, innocent, holy children. Say Amen 100 times. The more you have, the more noisy at home, but the happier and the better. B'ezrat Hashem. And there, what does he start off with? The Shla. One of the biggest giants ever. I'm zochet to be a 40-minute away neighbor in the Golan. He's buried in Tveria, right next to the Rambam. For me to go to the Shla Kadosh is, when I have time in the summer to learn a little, that's what I try to learn, Shla Kadosh. I can't even describe. So the Shla starts off his famous tefillah with a quote from the Zohar, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the entire world. Those of you who are familiar with the tefillah from last year will remember the line, Begin de'ishtamodah. Begin de'ishtamodah. God created the world so that He gets to be known. So that means that if I go through 120 years and I did not spend time getting to know Him, I missed out on my life. So just like Mordechai telling Esther, you're afraid to go in front of the king? Nachon. There's real fear. We mentioned some of them. It's food for thought for everyone. Why am I afraid to do that? And people can come up with their own stuff, which they don't necessarily want to share. Guilt feelings. I'm not so happy with the way I'm living my life. I've done things which are not appropriate. It's not pleasant to go in front of the king. It's understandable. But as long as I continue with that, somewhat of a game, I'm missing out on why God put me here in the first place, which is what Mordechai tells Esther. And the truth is, it's such a shame. Because having the guts, yes, to go in front of the king, and to put God and the awareness of Him in a real way into my life, without from religious games, that just let me put a check so I don't have to deal with Him. The more God enters into my consciousness, my life only changes to the good. And I'm going to want to go through, especially for those of you who are taking notes, as bullet points. And each one could be a whole shiur of its own, or a topic of conversation. You're welcome to come have it with me or with better people on the staff. Let's just go. I was sitting at home last week, just going through bullet points, like within 2 minutes. Came up with 7 points. Each one, I'll say 2 sentences. Each one is a book could be written. For sure, shiur should be given. By me, by others. Or a conversation to have with yourself. Or come, speak about it. When you put God into your life, it sounds so flaky and fluffy. It's so much not. We'll talk about it soon. How to try to do that. It brings tranquility and peace into your life. How? That's the whole portion of Avodat Hashem called bitachon, trust in God. There are svarim to learn, to address. Shar bitachon, chovot halavavot. I've mentioned it to multiple people here in the room. Life-changing. Learning to put your trust in God. But only when I learn it properly does it become something that I know and I can apply in life. It starts generating peace, tranquility, and taking out of my system stress and fear and worry. Especially in our generation where so many of the modern physical illnesses we know today are caused by stress, emotional pain, fear, all of which at some point after many years skip over just being an emotional feeling, and they start affecting over the other side of the mysterious bridge, the physical body, the tissue of the heart, etc., etc. There's no end to the effect on my mental and physical health when I live with trust. Not as a slogan, because I want to sound frum, because I learned the sugiyah. I put my brains to it. I worked hard over a few months, and I learned Sha'ar HaBitachon of Rabbeinu B'chaye. Well, and it's life-changing. I become more peaceful. I see people sit around and worry, and I say, "Ay, they're not living in God's reality." Now, that's number one. Number two, in a day and age not only of so much stress and fear and worry, but in a day and age of so much social dependency, especially with social media, but not only, the need for approval. The more God comes into my life, the more I free myself from social approval. I don't need anybody's approval. I have His approval, I'm good. I relate to people, I don't need them. You hear the difference? I free myself from social approval, from reassurance. I don't need your compliment. You gave me a compliment? Toda rabba. So I got a reminder that I'm doing something fine. You criticize me? Thank you for telling me what I have to work on. But my inner world is not shaken up by that. I'm good with Him. That's all that counts. I connect to the whole world. I'm not saying I'm at that level. Okay, I'm just describing the person who is on that level. I don't need your approval. Whether you approve or disapprove of what I'm doing, it's irrelevant. Right? Rav Nevinsong, the most important shiur that's given in the Tivari every day. What shiur? The way he walks in and the way he walks out. You couldn't care less. You stand up, you don't stand. You can see by his body language, it doesn't begin. It's irrelevant. We can also reach such levels. That's why he's here, to teach us that. It's the best shiur. It's the shiur without words. It's just by being. 3, clarity. The more God enters into my life, the more clarity I have in my life. When I have clarity up here, it trickles down, it spills over onto my entire being, into my character traits, into my midot in my heart and my body, to live with clarity. Ner mitzvah, Torah or, I'm just throwing out bullet points, as I said, to think about. Meaning, when my life invites HaKadosh Baruch Hu in, and I live in God's world, we'll elaborate on it a little more soon, my life can become infinitely meaningful. I stop living my own bubble of my Dalet Amot, and I start living something much bigger and infinitely meaningful, and that is in God's world. That requires shiurim upon shiurim upon. And as a result, I become a person with innate happiness, simcha. Why? Because meaning generates simcha. And even if people, chas v'shalom, went through horrific things in their life, if they went through that and experienced growth and meaning, they become happy campers. Next, number 5. What has been titled for this year? Emunah, with dealing with hardships, war. And in brackets, I want to say, I give this, not this, but I speak on Emunah every single year. Okay, it's every year a little different. These are issues which are always meant to be precious to us Jews, more than anything else. But since last year's Simchat Torah, it's meant to be at the very top of our head, constantly. It's all these topics are on levels of intensity like never before. We'll elaborate on it soon. When I live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, it's just a title. One has to bring it down. One has to develop it. Then I live through difficulty and sometimes even tragedy, but I take a deep breath and I understand this is something that was meant to be, whether as a people or me individually, Hashem Yishmor. But if I'm meant to go through this, I can take a deep breath and move forward. And if I don't live with this consciousness of meant to be, I can fall apart. And furthermore, I start developing gradually the understanding, and we've spoken about it in different shiurim over the last few months, that really what matters so much more than what I go through in life is who I become as a result of what I go through. And that's not possible with a world without a Kadosh Baruch Hu in it. But with a world view where the Kadosh Baruch Hu is in it, way more meaningful and significant than what I went through in life that passed already is, did I become or did I not become? And I can always become, even years later, as a result of what I went through. We all admire people who reach these levels. We can reach levels as such in a way that we admire ourselves. I want to reach a level that I look in the mirror and I admire myself. Thank you, God, for giving me the capability. And you can tap yourself on your shoulder for reaching these levels. Why can't you admire yourself? It doesn't have to lead to gaiva. On the contrary, inviting God into your life brings us to no end of humility and anava. Right? Igeret Ramban is all about that. 6. Most of you are not married yet, but you can imagine and relate how sweet and pleasant it could be to have a mate in life, to have somebody that you live with. It can be Gan Eden. It's only in Sheva Brachot that we hear that concept. Of all brachot, we never mention Gan Eden, only in Sheva Brachot. Marriage, when it's done correctly, with humility and a lot of internal work, can be Gan Eden. It can be sweet. It can be pleasant. Also, when you're married to Kadosh Baruch Hu, all Shir HaShirim is all about that. What? Married to Kadosh Baruch Hu? That's the whole Shir HaShirim is all about that. He's also our father, and he's also a king, and he's also a spouse. And yes, all these are titles that require a lot of elaboration. It's pleasant, it's sweet to live with somebody, to wake up and have him there with you. And go to sleep and he's there with you. It's pleasant, it's sweet. It makes life more pleasant. And finally, for now, one can go on with endless numbers. He, capital H, rubs off on me. The more I live him, the more he has an effect on me. B'ezrat Hashem, you'll be married, you'll see. Your wife has an effect on you, she rubs off on you, and you rub off on her. Hopefully the good midot, not the bad ones. We learned that. Hopefully not the hard way, the good way. You get to see. And some aspect of it you have already, but you're good friends here. Good midot, that's why it's so important to be around good friends. They have an effect, they rub off on us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu rubs off on me if I live with him. And therefore the knowledge of God, which is why he made this world, is not just an intellectual or philosophical knowledge. I'm meant to change as a person as a result of that knowledge. I'm meant to identify with what I discover and change. I turn to everyone in this room, to each individual. Some of you I know more personally, some not yet. And that is, I recommend you take advantage of the next few months here. And I'll explain what I mean. What's the difference between Eretz HaKodesh and any other country in the world? Not clear. Rav Kook says it's not something we're able to rationally understand. But I want to suggest the following. Even though rationally we don't understand it, this land is where God is. This is his land. I don't understand scientifically. It's irrelevant. That's what the Torah claims. Ze Eretz HaKodesh. He's here. In a way that it's much, much harder to discover him in Chutz La'aretz, and it's much easier to do it here. And that is why Judaism in Chutz La'aretz is a religion. And here, it's a reality. And if you want to know the difference between them, so then tomorrow morning, check the ways of that one Rebbe in the program who's not religious. Who am I talking about? We have people on the staff who, Baruch Hashem, are Haredi. We have people with kippot srugot. We have people who are just Jews. It's enough for them, such as the person speaking right now. A good friend, Rabbi Yoel Rakovsky. Rav Meis told me the other week also, I'm just a Jew. Good. I'm not giving grades. Hakol tov. And we have one person in the staff who's not religious. Who's that? Rav Tzemach. Tell him tomorrow morning. Rav Amos said, you're not religious. I don't think he'll be insulted. I think he'll take it as a compliment. Those of you who reflect upon his ways, and you cannot not reflect upon his ways, that's a walking explanation of the difference between religion and reality. And I'm not going to explain any further. That's exactly the quote of Rav Kook. The lessons without words are way beyond any lesson with words. I'm not going to say any further word. We also have in yeshiva a Rebbe who's a Ben Noach, the way God invented Bnei Noach to be, who I think is a Gilgul, possibly, of Tavi, the Eved of Rabban Gamliel. Who we're talking about? Of course. I mean it. We should just be zocher to leave the yeshiva at the end of the year and acquire his midot, his smile. One can be a Ben Noach and be a full-fledged human being. So how does one do that? How does one turn God into reality and not just an idea and not a religious idea? That's what we're going to try to do. Whoa. We'll start now till Rebbeinu stops me. You wake up in the morning as a frum Jew in New York City or in London. And that's what's around. The 5 towns, Manhattan, wherever it might be, London, Hendon, Golders Green. That's what you wake up into. And then you come to shul, and you try to work on Yechaven libo lebet kodesh hakodashim, as it says in the Gemara Masechet Brachot, and you remember that there's also another place on the other side of the ocean, and that is Eretz HaKodesh. When you wake up in Eretz HaKodesh, you wake up into Eretz HaKodesh. And you remember afterwards, there's also another place which is on the other side of the ocean. You'll say, no, come on, that's petty. It's not petty at all. It's all the difference in the world. It's a huge difference in consciousness. And I'll explain. Kedai to take this in. It's a question as where does reality actually begin? Torah claims it begins here, in Makom HaMikdash. That's where the world was originally made from. That's where all life is infused into the world. The Gemara Masechet Tanit says rain begins here, and then to the rest of the world. May rain much more in England. We should be zochet to such rains this winter. We haven't received rain. I live with farmers in the Golan. It's the driest year in many, many, many years. Please daven for rain for farmers in Eretz Yisrael. Rain begins here. It continues. All life begins here, it continues outside of here. Shlomo HaMelech, some of you know this, used to, Chazal teach us, he knew the pathways of life, so to speak. That the way they would extend from Beit HaMikdash to all over the world. And he would plant species on, if bananas grow in South America, wherever it might be, so he knew how to plant banana. More so, deeper than that. Those of you from Chumashir will be familiar with the following. Look inside quickly in source number 3. Akedat Yitzchak. I'll say this very quickly. Avram Avinu is going to do the Akedah. And just the underlying part. Vayelech el hamakom asher amar lo Elokim. He goes to the hamakom. What's the hamakom? The place. Bayom HaShlishi, he raises his eyes. Vayisa Avram et einav. Vayaret hamakom merachok. What does the Medrash say here? On the pshat level, it means the place. Which place? The future Yerushalayim, Beit HaMikdash, as we all know. Here. But Chazal open up our eyes. Vayaret hamakom merachok. Hamakom is referring to he. One of his name is hamakom. Hamakom yenachem etchem. Baruch hamakom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Medrash, why is God called? One of his name is hamakom. Quote, Shehu mekomo shel olam ve'ein ha'olam mekomo. God is the space of the world on top of which the entire world exists, and he, and the world is not his space, meaning in our simple English. It's a completely revolutionary consciousness. It's not that God is in the world is in him. It's deep, but life-changing. Torah changing. I can learn a lot of halacha, and I should. And anybody who comes to ask me about learning Kabbalah, learn halacha first. You learn halacha well, you're a real student of Rav Ami, then go fly. Without that, you won't be grounded. But if a person learns only halacha and only Gemara for many, many years, he may remain on the outskirts. Hamakom means the world exists in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a completely mental shift. It's not easy to take in. That's the pouring in content into what we started off with. Nothing exists but him. Anything that exists, it only exists inside of him. It's only because He provided it and continuously provides it with existence. It's very challenging. I mentioned earlier, Zachariah Balak and I work very hard to break our heads on these concepts. It's not easy concepts. Some of you learned Nefesh HaChaim with the Yisrael. Similarly, you may hear similar, difficult, very challenging. Nachon, because Torah Hashem is extremely deep. But when I put my mind to it, it can change me as a person. I start finding myself living in a different world. Now, going back to that point of Shlomo HaMelech, it sounds like, it's a nice, cute medrash. It's not relevant today. It sounds so old. That life begins here and the whole world revolves around here. Oh, yes. If you had a doubt till Simchat Torah, Hey Tafshin Pei Daled. So then, from then on, do you have a doubt that everything in the world revolves around what's going on over here? Israel and Hamas Yimach Shmam V'Zichram. Israel and Hezbollah Yimach Shmam V'Zichram. Israel and Iran. Israel and the Yemens. University campuses. The entire world. No, it doesn't all revolve around here. A nation that used to live here and was scattered around the world for thousands of years, and for 100 or 150 years are in the process of coming back to their original homeland. And the whole world is more and more and more revolving only around that. That's the only thing that really matters. And then there's a force in the world, a very intense force that's trying to block that from happening. From Am Yisrael coming back to Eretz Yisrael. Look inside, a fascinating Gemara. Source number 4, Masechet Sanhedrin. Bilam Harasha, in his vision, in his prophecy, says, Vayisam Eshalo vayomar, Oy mi yichyeh misumo el. He says an unclear pasuk. Bilam says, Oy, who can live with he whose name has El in it? Not so clear. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Oy mi shemechayeh atzmo b'shem El. Also not clear. Oy, I don't have to explain what Oy means. Oy for he who keeps himself alive with a name Kel in him. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Oy la la'uma, Oy to the nation, shetimatzeh b'sha'ah she'akadosh baruch hu oseh pidyon lebanav. Oy for the nation who's going to be there trying to prevent God from redeeming His children at the end of days that's talking about. Who would dare? The Gemara gives the following metaphor. Mi metil ksuto ben lavi leleviyah. Who would dare and be a fool to put a barrier or a garment between a lion and a lioness b'sha'ah shenizkakim zeim zem, when they're about to have relations? That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Jewish people at the end of days. Who? That nation. Oy for that nation. But who is that nation? So, before we address what that nation is, just quickly, just to mention the following. The Zohar says, and if we had more time, we would elaborate more, and another time we will speak, we'll address it more, and that is same famous Zohar. Very relevant to everything we spoke about till now. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked into Torah and created the world. Torah is nothing less than the blueprint of the world. Again, the world is inside its blueprint. Not that there's a world and in it there's also the Jewish people. That produces a consciousness of religion. Excuse me for the following. But in Chutz La'aretz it generates also such a slogan as Torah Umada. It's irrelevant. That sentence is irrelevant over here. Everything exists within Torah. Everything exists within the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is no room for dualities. Outside in Chutz La'aretz, it seems so. It's a different perspective. So, in what way is the Torah blueprint of the world? Sefer Bereshit, Parashat Bereshit, creation of the world. Torah is the blueprint of creation. That's the first parsha in the Torah. But then comes the end, the closing parsha in the Torah. Parshat Ha'azinu, look inside, source number 6. We're not going to read inside. Ha'azinu Shamayim V'Adabera. The song of the history of the world, which contains in it, according to all Mefarshim, the secrets of what's going to be the master plan of history of God, from beginning and all the way to the end. Not what may be if we listen to Him, but what will be, period. So much so that the Rambam brings us as a seemingly contradiction to the freedom of choice. And the Rambam addresses that question, which anybody who's somewhat of a thinker says, so if it's all planned out in advance, where's the freedom of choice? Says the Rambam, as a whole, the process is going to unfold with all the nations included. The freedom of choice is the individuals that make it up. I give it a little different twist. I didn't see this anywhere. The plan overall is all defined, blueprint by Torah. But the empty space, this is only a little piece of it, right? It extends and extends. But the empty space in the middle is undefined. The choices that we make. And we determine how things are going to unfold or not unfold. And that's the room, I think, of the individuals that makes up the whole. But the whole as a whole, that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what the Rambam says. That's the master plan of what history needs to go through. And as the sources tell us, whether it's here, whether it's source number 7, Parshat Nitzavim, where it says explicitly, I'm not going to read it inside, you're going to be scattered around the world, and at the end of days I'll gather you from the four corners of the earth, back to your homeland. Have we seen it or have we not seen it? I'm turning right now to any atheist, and any agnostic person, and I'll ask him, are you willing for a moment to be really, truly, intellectually honest, and put your preferences aside, your preference that there should not be any God? You can't bear that reality. And your preference that let's leave things vague and unclear if I define myself as an agnostic person. So then I can be less obligated if things remain unclear. So I have a psychological need to leave things unclear, so I'm less committed, I'm less obligated. Let's leave everything vague. I'm turning to any such person and say, do you have, with all your intellectual honesty, do you have a reasonable explanation for the ongoing existence of the Jewish people throughout the ages? Rav Yaakov Emden, one of the leaders of Klal Yisrael 250 years ago, says that even if he were to be himself present at Kriyat Yam Suf, it wouldn't be as big as a miracle for him as the ongoing existence of the Jewish people. Why? Because Kriyat Yam Suf, I think, is an event. A miraculous event, but it's an event. The ongoing existence of Jews throughout the ages is not an event. It's reality itself screaming out, the Jewish people need to exist. Do you have an explanation for that? Do you have an explanation for the fact that reality itself, history itself, necessitates that anybody who ever dared raise his hand on the Jewish people finds himself in the garbage can of history? Whether his name was Paro, Nebuchadnezzar, the Yavanim, the Romans, the Spanish Inquisition, Hitler Yimach Shmo V'Zichro, Eichmann Yimach Shmo V'Zichro, Mengele, Dr. Mengele Yimach Shmo V'Zichro, Chassan Nasrallah Yimach Shmo V'Zichro, Yichya Sinwar Yimach Shmo V'Zichro. They're all in one big garbage can. Do you have an explanation? Do you have an explanation for the fact that every single year, Seder night, Jews say, for hundreds of years, B'chol dor v'dor, Omdim aleinu lechalotenu, and they claim that Kadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodam. Do you have an explanation? Or not? And if not, admit that you don't. I personally don't like to use the term proof for God. I know others do, even in yeshiva. You don't have to be committed to what I'm saying. I'm just sharing with you. I don't know in the source, in the Torah that talks about proofs for God or for the truth of Torah. I do know another term, testimony. Torah Hashem Tmima. Baruch Hashem, we hear this, you guys sing this a lot. Torah Hashem Tmima, Meshivat Nafesh. Edut Hashem Ne'emana, Machkimat Beti. Torah testifies to God. The Navi Yeshayahu says, you, my people, Atem Eidai Ne'um Hashem. You are my witnesses. You testify to me in the world. The fact that you continue existing, despite every attempt to demolish you. And the fact that those, your enemies, turn into dust one after another. That's where history screams out. History unfolds that truth. It was a claim at the beginning of our history, but we have the zchut of being at the end of days. And we can look back and see, and ask ourselves with all the intellectual honesty, is that true or is that not true? Do we have any alternative explanation? Are we willing to go for any sociological explanations? Those who are chaste and those who are hated somehow find within themselves the ability to, if that satisfies you, it doesn't, I don't have to say, right? I think it's an insult to the human intellect, even to say those sentences. But these are choices everybody has to make. The fact that Amos Luban believes 100% in everything he's saying tonight, and he does, because I worked hard here over these concepts for many years, that's good for me. But if you want to acquire your emunah, you need to fold your sleeves and put your head to work and to reach exact same clarity. And you can. Emunah does not mean it's probably truth, leap of faith, beyond reasonable doubt. I don't buy any of those terms. And I know certain institutions and Rabbanim use them. By me, unacceptable. Asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata betocheinu. Either we believe in what we're saying or not. Asher natan lanu Torat emet is not beyond reasonable doubt. It's a claim. I know it's the truth. That means I can reach that clarity. I know it's the truth. You're not sure how to do it? Come, talk. There are enough good people over here. We don't have answers. Go to other places. Maybe there are better brains there. We'll finish off with the following. Who is that nation that's the Gemara here in Sanhedrin is referring to? And we'll finish with that. Look inside source number 5 and source number 10. What the Gemara covers, for some reason, the Medrash opens up on the same pasuk. Look inside just the beginning of source 5. Amar Bilam. What does he mean? Oy mi yichya misumoel. Mishivim leshanot. Of the 70 nations of the world, no other nation has the name Kel, the name of God, in it, other than we, Klal Yisrael. But there's only one other nation that has also the name of God in it. Kel. Which one? Ishmael. That's what that pasuk is referring to. Oi, says the Medrash, who will be able to live in his days? And if you look afterwards, we don't have time to see it inside. Afterwards, you'll see in source number 10. Another twist that the same Medrash gives. Why is he called Ishmael? Because God at the end of the days is future to hear us screaming out to God because of what this people, Yishmael, B'nai Yishmael, are going to do in this world. And we know Torah gave us a definition for who Ishmael is going to be before he was even born. And that's source number 8. V'hu yeh Pere Adam, his mother is told. What's the difference between a Pere Adam and an Adam? What's the difference between a Pere Adam and an Adam? I'll tell you. And if you see the video of Arbel Yahud, the 29, I think, year old woman, who was taken out, and there were these, and people call them barbaric animals. That's an insult to animals. I mean it. Animals do exactly what they were designed to do. These are barbaric monsters. You see her innocent face full of fear. You see hundreds and hundreds, thousands of barbaric monsters wanting to tear her to pieces. That's a Pere Adam. That's not an Adam. That's a Pere Adam. I've mentioned it here last year. I'll mention it again. I'm sure some of you heard that recording. On the day of Simchat Torah, this young Arab, Yimach Shmo v'zichro, a recording of he called his parents to tell him, whatever it is in Arabic, Abba, Iba, I have the blood of 10 Jews on my fingers. Look, I've killed 10 Jews. And the father and mother say, our son, we're so proud of you. That's a Pere Adam. That's shechting babies and putting them in ovens. That's breaking the pelvises of women to rape them and then shoot them as they're screaming. That's a Pere Adam. And what we see from the sources here, and many others, and the Zohar, and Talmidei Ari, we knew in advance, it's not a surprise, that at the end of days, before Mashiach comes, we're going to have to put up with this nation called Ishmael. But the hope and the optimism is the fact that the same very Medrash says, if you look inside in source number 5, towards the bottom, Ubiyimehem Ya'amod Tzemach ben David. It's going to be at that stage where the wars that Yishmael is going to bring upon us and upon the world, Tzemach ben David, Mashiach ben David, is going to come as a result of this process. And that's the stage that we're at. And everything that Torah ever promised that will be, happened exactly according to plan. You will live in this land and you'll be scattered around the world. And you'll be shechted and hated and mocked and persecuted. But at the end of days, you will exist, and I'll bring you back to the homeland, and I'll gather you from the four corners of the earth, back to Eretz Yisrael. Human history has never seen anything even close to that. And then, and we'll finish with that, we all become Esther Malka. Why were we chosen to be put into this generation? And what role are we meant to play in God's world? Are we going to be spending our life? Or did I come out of my mother's womb to see 22 people, Bnei Yefet and Bnei Cham, running after a ball and throwing each other to the floor? Is that why I came out of my mother's womb? Or I came out of my mother's womb to find a good wife who's on board with me to help God make this world a better place? That's the choice we have to make. We're all Esther Malkas. Esther Malkas is not a fascinating story. It's the most fascinating story ever, I think. But it's there to teach us the formulas for our life. You were put here. Maybe that's why God put you here in the first place. To become a worker in His firm. That is what Avodat Hashem means. And you work well enough, you'll become a partner in His firm. Whose firm? God's firm. Of what? Of making this world what He intended it for it to be in the first place. I made this world, no one else. I have a right to expect the world to live up to what I chose for it to be. No one else made this world. There is no other world. There is no other reality. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. That was amazing.